My name is Rebecca, 34 years old, and I just watched my own mother lock the heavy oak front door in my face, leaving my shivering 6-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son standing in the freezing snow. She yelled that I was ruining her perfect Thanksgiving, that my sister deserved this house more than a calculating accountant like me and to get off her property. She even threw my children's coats onto the icy porch before slamming the door. But as I stood there in the bitter wind holding my crying kids close, I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled. Because what my mother and my arrogant brother-in-law did not know was that the $36,000 check I wrote back in February to save this house from the bank was not a gift. It was a strategic purchase, and they had just kicked the actual legal owner off their front porch. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your toxic family. The nightmare started exactly 2 hours earlier. Our family Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be a time of gratitude, but in my mother Nancy's house, it was always a theatrical performance of fake wealth. Growing up in this sprawling suburban home, I learned quickly that appearances meant everything. The crystal glasses had to shine, the catered turkey had to look flawless, and we all had to pretend my mother was not drowning in credit card debt to maintain her country club lifestyle. I sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany dining table, slicing a piece of dry turkey for my son Leo, while my mother poured expensive champagne for my younger sister Brittany. At 31, Brittany was still the undeniable golden child. She had never held a steady job, but she wore a designer silk dress that I knew cost more than my first car. Sitting next to her was her husband Jamal. Jamal was 33, sharply dressed in a tailored suit and possessed an ego that took up half the room. He loved playing the role of a visionary entrepreneur, even though his businesses always seemed to require sudden bailouts from my mother. Right now, Jamal was loudly dominating the conversation, aggressively, bragging about the brand new Tesla parked in the driveway. "I am telling you, Nancy, the acceleration is incredible," Jamal said, swirling his champagne glass. "We just paid cash for the performance model. You have to spend money to make money, right? It is all about projecting success. When my clients see me pull up in that car, they know I am playing in the big leagues." Brittany leaned into him, flashing a brilliant, perfectly whitened smile. "Jamal is just so good at manifesting wealth," she chimed in. "We are already looking at booking a month-long trip to the Maldives for the winter. You should see the overwater bungalows we picked out." My mother beamed at them, completely ignoring the fact that just last week she called me sobbing because her electricity was about to be shut off. "I am so proud of you both," Nancy gushed, reaching over to pat Jamal on the arm. "It is so wonderful to see you thriving. You deserve every bit of this success. You have such a vibrant energy, not like some people who just sit around counting pennies all day." Her eyes darted sharply in my direction. "I am a certified public accountant and an independent financial consultant. I built my firm from the ground up, working 80-hour weeks while raising 2 kids alone after a painful divorce." But in my mother's eyes, my stable career was just boring and cold. I lacked Brittany's supposed feminine charm or Jamal's flashy charisma. I was just the reliable bank they could tap into when the illusion of their wealth started to crack. I took a slow sip of my water, feeling the cold glass against my fingers. I looked out the bay window at the gleaming white Tesla, then back at Jamal. He was wearing a gold watch that caught the light from the chandelier above us. My mind immediately flashed to the unpaid invoices sitting on my desk at work. Just 4 months ago, Jamal had secretly charged over $2,000 of high-end construction materials to my company's trade account. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, promising to pay me back. I had not seen a single dime. The audacity of him boasting about luxury cars made my blood boil, but I stayed quiet, knowing I held the ultimate winning hand. I set my fork down quietly. The soft clink against the china cut through the sound of Jamal's booming laughter. "That is a beautiful car, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Since business is clearly booming and you are paying cash for luxury vehicles, I assume you are finally ready to settle the $2,500 you owe my firm for the contractor materials you charged to my account last July. The dining room went completely silent. Brittany dropped her fork. My mother's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a tight, furious line. Jamal stared at me, his eyes narrowing as the friendly entrepreneur facade slipped away. Are you seriously bringing this up right now? Jamal asked, his voice dripping with condescension. At the Thanksgiving dinner table, I folded my napkin and placed it next to my plate. You just spent 10 minutes giving us a financial presentation about your new Tesla, I replied calmly. It seemed like the perfect time to discuss your outstanding ledgers. Jamal pushed his chair back violently. The legs scraped loudly against the expensive hardwood floor. You are unbelievable, Rebecca. This is exactly why you are sitting here alone while your sister and I are building an empire. You are a glorified calculator. You sit in your little office obsessed with pennies, counting other people's money because you do not know how to make real wealth yourself. I am a visionary entrepreneur. I deal in big picture concepts and major acquisitions, not petty invoices from 4 months ago. You have zero business mindset. I did not flinch or raise my voice. Visionary entrepreneurs usually pay their suppliers Jamal. Otherwise, it is just called stealing. That did it. My mother slammed her hand down on the table, making the crystal wine glasses rattle. Enough! Nancy shrieked, her face flushing bright red with anger. How dare you come into my home and disrespect your brother-in-law like this? He is family, Rebecca. Family does not nickel and dime each other over some stupid construction materials. I looked directly at my mother. It is $2,500, Mom. I am a single mother running a business. I cannot afford to subsidize his extravagant lifestyle. Nancy stood up, looming over the table with absolute disgust. Oh, please, do not play the victim with me. You have always been completely selfish. Ever since you were a teenager, you have held on to every dime like a miserable miser. You are just jealous of Brittany. You have always been jealous of her natural grace and success. My mother leaned forward, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. And do not act like we owe you anything. You should be happy to help your sister and her husband. You owe this family for raising you. Or have you forgotten who put a roof over your head growing up? It is always about you and your little accounting firm, just like when you pitched a massive fit because I used your college fund to pay for Brittany's dream wedding. You survived, did you not? You took out student loans and you survived just fine. Brittany needed that luxury wedding to establish her social standing with Jamal's friends. You just needed to sit in a dusty library. The sheer rewriting of history was breathtaking. I had worked 3 part-time jobs in high school to save that college fund, and my mother had forged my signature to drain the account entirely. But in her mind, I was the villain for being upset about being robbed. She is absolutely right, Rebecca. Brittany chimed in, crossing her arms defensively. You are being completely toxic right now. Jamal is working on a massive real estate deal downtown. He is going to flip 3 commercial properties by spring. $2,500 is pocket change to him. He just forgot about it because he has much bigger things to worry about than your petty little spreadsheet. If it is just pocket change, then he can write me a check right now, I countered smoothly. Jamal scoffed loudly, running a hand over his perfectly trimmed beard and adjusting his gold watch. I am not writing you a check for anything today. You insulted me in front of my mother-in-law. You blatantly disrespected my business acumen. Consider that debt canceled as a tax for your terrible, bitter attitude. I looked at the 3 of them sitting there. A mother who stole from me, a sister who felt completely entitled to my life, and a brother-in-law who thought he could steal from my business. They were a perfect circle of delusion. Nancy walked around the table and pointed her finger sharply toward the hallway, her face contorted with pure rage. You will apologize to Jamal this instant, my mother hissed, her arm trembling with fury as she pointed toward the foyer. You will stand up, look him in the eye, and beg for his forgiveness for ruining this family dinner. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. My son Leo stopped chewing his turkey, his wide eyes darting between his grandmother and me. Mia instinctively grabbed the hem of my sweater, her tiny hands shaking. I placed a reassuring hand on my daughter's shoulder, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I will absolutely not apologize for asking a grown man to pay his bills, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the hysterics my mother was practically begging for. Jamal is a fraud, and you are enabling him. I am done playing pretend. My mother gasped dramatically, clutching her pearls as if I had just struck her across the face. How dare you! She screamed, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous woman. You sit there in your lonely little life seething with envy because your sister has a husband who loves her and a future full of immense wealth. You cannot stand to see Brittany happy. You never could. You want everyone to be as miserable and exhausted as you are. Brittany let out a loud theatrical sob, burying her face into Jamal's shoulder. Jamal wrapped his arm around her, glaring at me with a triumphant smirk. He was loving every single second of this. He loved watching my own mother tear me down to protect his fragile ego. This house is for Brittany and Jamal. Anyway, my mother shouted, stomping her foot on the hardwood floor. They are the future of this family. They are the ones who will bring prestige to our name. I am giving them this house, and I do not want your toxic energy infecting these walls for one more minute. Get out! Get out of my house right now! Mom, it is freezing outside, I said, maintaining my composure even as my heart pounded against my ribs. We are in the middle of a blizzard. I am not taking the children out in the middle of a storm before they have even finished their dinner. I do not care, she snapped viciously. She marched past the dining table and stormed into the front hallway. I watched in disbelief as she ripped open the hall closet. She grabbed my wool coat off the hanger, followed by Leo's winter jacket and Mia's tiny pink parka. Before I could even stand up properly, my mother yanked the heavy oak front door open. A blast of freezing wind and snow immediately whipped into the warm house, extinguishing the expensive scented candles burning on the entryway table. She threw our coats out onto the icy porch. They landed in a heap, quickly gathering fresh snowflakes. Then she turned back to me, her eyes completely devoid of any maternal warmth. Leave, she ordered. I looked at Brittany and Jamal. Jamal was practically glowing with satisfaction, leaning against the doorframe of the dining room, his arms crossed over his chest. Brittany was suddenly dry-eyed, watching me with a cold, superior stare. They were thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of my humiliation. I did not argue. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg or cry. Come on, kids, I said softly. I took Leo by the left hand and Mia by the right. We walked slowly and deliberately past my mother, stepping out into the biting cold of the winter night. The wind hit us like a physical blow. Mia gasped, her teeth immediately starting to chatter, as her thin holiday dress provided zero protection against the freezing temperature. I quickly knelt on the snow-covered porch, picking up their jackets and wrapping them around their small, trembling shoulders. Leo looked up at me, his bottom lip quivering. Are we in trouble, Mommy? He whispered. No, sweetheart, I promised, kissing his cold forehead. We are just going home. I stood up and turned around to face the house one last time. My mother was standing in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the warm golden light of the foyer. Behind her, Jamal stepped forward, wrapping his arm around her shoulders in a mock display of comfort. He looked right at me, a sickeningly arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He mouthed the words, "See you later, loser." My mother did not say another word. She just grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door and slammed it shut with a deafening thud. The metallic click of the deadbolt locking echoed sharply through the quiet, snow-covered neighborhood. We were locked out into the freezing cold forever. I buckled Leo and Mia into the back seat, my hands moving with mechanical precision. The car was freezing, and I quickly turned the engine on, blasting the heater to its maximum setting. Mia was crying softly, rubbing her little hands together, while Leo stared out the frosted window at the house that was supposed to be his grandmother's safe haven. Do not cry, sweetie, I said, keeping my voice steady and reassuring as I pulled out of the driveway. We are perfectly fine. No one is ever going to treat us like that again. I watched the sprawling colonial house shrink in my rearview mirror. Most people in my position would be sobbing, devastated by the profound betrayal of their own mother. But as I navigated the slick, snow-covered streets of our suburban neighborhood, I did not shed a single tear. I felt nothing but a sharp, cold calculation settling into my bones. My mother and Jamal thought they had won. They thought they had successfully discarded me like trash. But they were playing checkers and I had been playing chess for months. I reached over and pressed a button on my dashboard connecting my phone to the car's Bluetooth system. I called my real estate attorney, David. It was Thanksgiving night, but David knew to answer when I called. "Hello, Rebecca." David's voice came through the car speakers, sounding slightly muffled against the background noise of his own family dinner. "Tell me you are not working tonight." "I am always working." "David," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the icy road ahead. "I need an update on the property at Elm Street. The county tax office processed everything, right?" I heard David sigh, the sound of paper rustling on his end. "Yes, it is all officially finalized. The deed was recorded on Tuesday." "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Rebecca? I mean, this is your mother we are talking about." I glanced in the rearview mirror at my shivering children. "She just threw my 6-year-old daughter into a blizzard, David. I am absolutely sure." "Walk me through the timeline one more time so I know there are no loopholes." "Well," David began, shifting into his professional tone. "As you know, your mother failed to pay her property taxes for 3 consecutive years. The county was going to foreclose and auction the house. Back in February, she owed $36,000 in back taxes and penalties. Instead of giving her the money as a gift, which she assumed you did, you had your limited liability company purchase the county tax lien certificate. This legally gave you the right to collect that debt, or eventually take the property if she defaulted. She thought I just paid the bill for her," I said, a grim smile forming on my lips. "She never bothered to read the legal notices the county sent her. She just threw them in the trash, assuming I handled it." "Exactly," David continued. "Under state law, she had a 6-month redemption period to pay your company back the $36,000 plus interest. That period expired in August, since she made 0 payments and ignored all the court summons. We filed for a tax lien foreclosure. The judge signed the final order this week. The property no longer belongs to Nancy. Your company is the sole legal owner of that house, free and clear of any other mortgages, because tax liens take absolute priority. So she cannot transfer the deed to anyone else," I confirmed, steering the car onto the main highway toward my apartment. A quiet laugh echoed through the speakers. "She cannot transfer what she does not own," David said. "If she tries to sign a quitclaim deed to your sister or brother-in-law, it will be completely legally void. The house is yours, Rebecca. You hold the absolute title." "Thank you, David," I said, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction wash over me. "Draft the eviction notice. I will let you know when to serve it. Have a good Thanksgiving." I ended the call just as the warmth finally began to fill the cabin of the car. Leo and Mia were falling asleep, the rhythmic hum of the tires lulling them into a sense of safety. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. The dashboard screen lit up with an incoming text message from Jamal. I tapped the screen to read it out loud. "Mom is signing the house over to us next week. You get nothing, loser." I stared at the glowing words, my smile widening into a genuine grin. I did not reply. I just kept driving into the night, letting them enjoy their stolen house for a few more days. The following Tuesday morning, the freezing Thanksgiving blizzard had melted away, leaving the city streets wet and bustling. I was sitting in my downtown office going over a complex corporate tax strategy with one of my highest-paying clients. My consulting firm occupied the 14th floor of a sleek glass high-rise, a space I had purchased and completely remodeled 2 years ago. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, and the mahogany desk in front of me was a testament to the 80-hour work weeks I had put in to build my independence. I was just about to hand my client a projected earnings report when the heavy glass door to my suite swung violently open. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Chloe, hurried in right behind the intruder, looking frantic. "I am so sorry, Rebecca," Chloe said, her voice laced with panic. "I told him you were in a private meeting, but he just shoved right past my desk." I looked up and saw Jamal strutting into the center of my office like he had just bought the entire building. He was wearing an absurdly tight designer suit that screamed new money, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked at my client, a distinguished older gentleman who ran a multi-million-dollar logistics company, and waved his hand dismissively. "Wrap it up, buddy," Jamal said, pointing his finger toward the hallway. "This is family business. You can come back and play with the spreadsheets later." My client bristled, his face reddening at the blatant disrespect. I held up a calm, reassuring hand. "It is perfectly fine, Mr. Harrison," I said smoothly. "We have covered the primary tax strategies for this quarter anyway. Chloe will validate your parking and set up a brief follow-up call for Thursday. Thank you for coming in." Mr. Harrison nodded curtly, glaring at Jamal as he picked up his briefcase and walked out. Chloe closed the glass door behind him, leaving Jamal and me alone in the quiet expanse of my office. I leaned back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. "You just interrupted a meeting with a man whose annual tax burden is larger than your entire imaginary net worth," I stated, keeping my tone even. "What do you want?" "Jamal?" Jamal snorted, pacing around my office and running his hand over my expensive bookshelves as if inspecting them for dust. He picked up a framed photo of Leo, and Mia glanced at it with a smirk and set it back down, face down. "Do not try to intimidate me with your little accountant games," Rebecca, Jamal said, walking over to my desk. He popped the latches on his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it carelessly onto the center of my desk. It landed with a heavy slap against the wood. I looked down at the envelope but did not reach for it. "What is this?" I asked. "It is the final step in securing what actually belongs to me and your sister," he replied smoothly, leaning over my desk and invading my personal space. His cologne was overpowering, cheap, and metallic. "You see, since your mother is officially transferring the deed of the house to us next week, my lawyer advised me to make sure there are no loose ends. We know how petty and vindictive you can be. That right there is a quitclaim deed. You are going to sign it today, waiving any future inheritance rights or claims you think you might have on that property." I stared at him, feeling a genuine wave of amusement wash over me. "You barged into my business, insulted my client, and disrupted my workday to demand I sign away my inheritance." Jamal laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Let us be real, Rebecca. You do not need that house. You already have this little corporate setup going on. Though looking at you, it is pretty obvious why you are sitting here all alone." He leaned back, crossing his arms and looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You are too hard, Rebecca. Too rigid. You think making money makes you a boss, but it just makes you unbearable. That is exactly why your husband left you, is it not? You have absolutely no concept of feminine submission. You do not know how to let a real man lead. Look at Brittany. She knows how to treat a husband. She knows her place, and because of that, she gets to live a life of pure luxury while you are stuck playing the role of a stressed-out single mother, dragging your kids out into blizzards because you cannot control your mouth. Just sign this paper right now, Rebecca." He tapped his perfectly manicured finger against the thick manila envelope lying on my desk. I slowly reached out and picked it up. The paper felt heavy, crisp, and completely official. I slid the document out and smoothed it flat over the polished mahogany surface. Printed in bold black letters at the top was the heading, "Quitclaim Deed." I read through the dense legal jargon with the practiced eye of a seasoned financial consultant. It was a standard waiver. By signing it, I would legally relinquish any and all future claims to my mother's property on Elm Street. It stipulated I acknowledged my mother's intent to transfer the estate, including all equity, directly to Brittany and Jamal. I looked up from the document. Jamal was watching me intently, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. He shifted his weight, crossing his arms over his chest to make his suit jacket stretch. "Do not even think about calling a lawyer," he warned, his voice dropping in a pathetic attempt to sound intimidating. Because if you refuse to sign that paper today, you are completely dead to this family. Nancy has already made up her mind. If you do not sign away your rights right now, you will never be allowed back in her house. You will not be invited to Christmas. You will not be invited to Easter. Your children will never see their grandmother again. She will completely cut you out of her life, and you will be left with absolutely nothing. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on my desk, bringing his face close to mine. You are already an outcast, Rebecca, he sneered softly. Do not make it worse for yourself. Just be a good little sister. Sign the deed and let the real adults handle the family assets. If you do this quietly, maybe Brittany will let you come over for a barbecue next summer, so your kids do not forget what a real family looks like. I stared into his eyes. He was so incredibly arrogant, so utterly convinced of his own superior intellect. He actually believed he was cornering me. He thought he was playing a master stroke, executing a brilliant legal maneuver that would secure his financial future forever. He had no idea a quitclaim deed only transferred whatever interest the grantor currently held. Since my mother already lost the house to my company through foreclosure, she held zero interest. Signing this piece of paper meant absolutely nothing. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of defeat. It was a chilling, knowing smile. I felt a deep, profound sense of calm wash over me. Jamal blinked, completely thrown off. He expected me to yell or throw the document back. He had expected a fight. He did not know how to handle my serene silence. You think this is funny? Jamal snapped, his confidence faltering for just a fraction of a second. I think it is poetic, Jamal, I replied softly. I opened my top drawer and pulled out my favorite silver fountain pen. I uncapped it smoothly. You want me to give up my claim to the house? You want to make sure I never see a single dime of that equity? That is exactly what I want, he growled, standing up straight again and puffing out his chest. Okay, I said quietly. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line with a bold, fluid flourish. I added the date next to my signature. I did not hesitate for a single second. I slid the signed document back across the desk toward him. It is all yours, Jamal. I waive every single right to my mother's estate. Jamal stared at the signature in absolute shock. He clearly had not expected it to be this easy. A greedy, triumphant grin quickly broke across his face. He snatched the paper, practically vibrating with excitement. He slid it into the envelope and tucked it under his arm. See? Jamal mocked, buttoning his suit jacket. Was that so hard? Maybe there is a little bit of sense in that head of yours after all. Have a nice life in your lonely little tower, Rebecca. We will send you a postcard from the Maldives. He marched out of my office, the heavy glass door slowly swinging shut behind him. I sat alone in the quiet room, happily listening to the faint, satisfying click of his expensive leather shoes fading down the long hallway. He was practically skipping to the waiting elevator, totally unaware that he had just successfully bullied me into handing him a completely useless piece of paper. The trap was perfectly set, and they were eagerly sprinting right into it without looking. 2 days after Jamal walked out of my office with his worthless piece of paper, my mother summoned me to a mandatory family lunch. She did not invite me because she wanted to make amends for throwing my children into a blizzard. She invited me because she needed an audience. Nancy was obsessed with maintaining her image at the Oak Ridge Country Club, a pretentious place filled with manicured golf courses and people who measured their worth by their zip codes. If I suddenly stopped showing up to public family gatherings, the local gossip mill would start spinning, and my mother could not risk anyone suspecting that her perfect family was fractured. I arrived at the club's dining room right on time, wearing a tailored navy suit that cost more than my mother's monthly mortgage payment. She had booked a large circular table by the window overlooking the pristine 18th hole. Sitting with her were 2 of her oldest friends, Patricia and Diane, women who spent their days drinking overly expensive Chardonnay and judging everyone around them. Brittany and Jamal were there too, looking incredibly smug as they sipped sparkling water. I took the only empty seat directly across from my mother. "Oh, Rebecca, you finally made it," my mother said loudly, making sure the neighboring tables could hear her forced, cheerful tone. "I was just telling Patricia and Diane our wonderful news." Patricia leaned forward, her heavy diamond necklace catching the light. Nancy was just saying that she is transferring the deed of the family home to Brittany and Jamal next week. Patricia gushed, giving me a look that was equal parts pity and condescension. It is just such a beautiful, generous gesture. Not many mothers would give up their estate as an early inheritance. Diane nodded enthusiastically, raising her wine glass. It truly is remarkable, Nancy. You are setting them up for a lifetime of success. It is so hard for young couples to get a foothold in real estate these days. My mother placed a hand over her heart, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch flawlessly. Well, you know me, Diane. I have always believed in giving my children everything they need to thrive. Brittany and Jamal are building such a bright future, and I want to be here to watch them enjoy the house. Plus, it just makes sense financially to keep the equity in the family. I sliced into my grilled salmon, keeping my expression entirely neutral. It certainly makes financial sense for Jamal, I remarked casually, not looking up from my plate, especially since he does not have to put a single dollar down. Jamal glared at me, his jaw tightening. My mother quickly shot me a warning look, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. Rebecca, please do not ruin a beautiful moment with your bitterness, Nancy scolded, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You have to understand that as a mother, I have to distribute my assets where they will do the most good. Brittany has such a delicate disposition, and Jamal is on the verge of a massive career breakthrough. They need the stability of a paid-off home. I looked directly at her. Just like Brittany needed the stability of my college fund to pay for her luxury wedding 6 years ago. The table went dead silent. Patricia and Diane awkwardly looked down at their expensive salads. My mother's face flushed a deep, angry red. That was entirely different, Nancy hissed, leaning across the table and dropping the sweet facade. I was the one who put that money into the account, and I had every right to use it to ensure your sister had a respectable start to her marriage. A backyard wedding would have humiliated this family. You were smart enough to take out loans. You managed just fine. I smiled tightly, placing my fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. You forged my signature to drain that account, Mom. But you are right. I did manage just fine. I built my firm without a dime from you. Patricia cleared her throat loudly, attempting to break the suffocating tension. Well, she muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. It is just wonderful that Nancy is so giving now. We should all be so lucky to have a mother who sacrifices so much for her daughters. They all stared at me with profound pity, viewing me as the bitter, jealous older sister who could not be happy for her siblings' windfall. Brittany smirked, taking a delicate sip of her water, while Jamal checked his gold watch with an arrogant sigh. They truly believed they had won. They thought this public humiliation was putting me in my place. But as I sat there enduring their fake sympathy, I felt no anger at all. Instead of anger, all I felt was a profound sense of anticipation. I finished my grilled salmon in complete silence, allowing my mother and her country club friends to bask in their fabricated reality. When the waiter brought the check, my mother graciously paid with a credit card I knew for a fact was dangerously close to its limit. We all stood up, exchanged tight, meaningless hugs, and walked out to the valet stand. Brittany and Jamal climbed into their shiny new Tesla, shooting me one last triumphant sneer, before pulling away. I got into my own car and drove straight back to my downtown office. The afternoon sun was casting long, sharp shadows across the city skyline as I rode the elevator up to the 14th floor. I walked past Chloe at the front desk, gave her a polite nod, and stepped into my private suite. I locked the heavy glass door behind me. I sat down at my mahogany desk, the very same desk where Jamal had arrogantly demanded my signature just 2 days prior. I opened my laptop and typed in my master password. It was time to pull the plug on my mother's perfect little illusion. Years ago, when I was just starting my accounting firm, my mother had come to me in a state of absolute panic. She had maxed out every single credit card she owned, paying for luxury vacations and designer clothes she could not afford. Her credit score had completely tanked, hitting rock bottom, just as the utility companies threatened to cut off all services to the family house. Because Leo and Mia were frequently staying over there at the time, and because I still held a lingering sense of familial duty, I stepped in. I legally transferred the water, electricity, gas, and even the homeowner's insurance policies under my name and my pristine credit score. I set up an automatic payment system from my secondary bank account, ensuring the lights stayed on and the house stayed warm. My mother promised to reimburse me every month. Unsurprisingly, those reimbursements stopped arriving years ago. I had been silently subsidizing their comfortable existence ever since, a fact they conveniently chose to forget while parading around as wealthy elites. I opened my internet browser and navigated directly to the City Water Department website. I typed in my credentials and stared at the dashboard displaying the property address on Elm Street. My mouse hovered over the account settings. With a single decisive click, I disabled the automatic payment feature. Next, I clicked the option for service termination. A prompt appeared asking for the date of disconnection. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Jamal and Brittany were planning to start their massive kitchen demolition this weekend, followed by a lavish pre-renovation party to celebrate their new home ownership. I selected this coming Friday afternoon for the shutoff. The system asked if I wanted to leave a forwarding address for the final bill. I typed in Jamal's name and the Elm Street address, smiling as I hit confirm. I repeated the exact same meticulous process for the gas company. Account settings, cancel autopay, schedule termination of service for Friday. Next on the list was the local city electric company. I watched the screen load, thinking about the massive chandeliers my mother loved to keep burning all night to make the house look impressive from the street. I thought about Jamal charging his brand new Tesla in the garage. I clicked the red terminate service button, scheduling the blackout for Friday at exactly 5 in the evening. Finally, I logged into the insurance provider portal. Since my limited liability company now legally owned the property, the old homeowner's policy attached to my mother's name was completely obsolete anyway. I canceled it immediately, securing a new commercial property policy under my firm's name. I sat back in my leather chair, listening to the quiet hum of my office building. In less than 15 minutes, I had completely severed the lifelines keeping that house functional. I did not send a text message to warn them. I did not call my mother to threaten her. I let the digital gears of the utility companies grind into motion. They had spent my entire life taking my reliability for granted, treating my financial support as their birthright, while simultaneously punishing me for providing it. They thought the quitclaim deed Jamal forced me to sign meant they had pushed me out of the picture. They were about to learn what a picture looked like when the background was entirely pitch black. I closed my laptop, neatly aligned my pens on the desk, and packed my briefcase to go home to my children, eagerly waiting for the chaos of Friday to arrive. Friday evening arrived with a bitter chill in the air, bringing a fresh layer of frost to the city windows. Inside my downtown apartment, the atmosphere was completely different. The ambient heating hummed quietly, wrapping the rooms in a comforting layer of warmth. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic potatoes drifted from my kitchen. I stood at the stove stirring gravy, feeling a deep sense of peace that I had not experienced in years. Meanwhile, 10 miles away in the affluent suburbs, my mother's sprawling colonial house was being prepped for the social event of the season. According to the social media updates, Brittany had been aggressively posting all afternoon. The pre-renovation party was in full swing. She had hired a luxury catering company to serve hors d'oeuvres on silver platters, and Jamal had undoubtedly popped several bottles of imported champagne. They were busy showing off their newly acquired estate to a house full of equally pretentious guests. Oblivious to the ticking clock, I checked my watch. It was exactly 5 o'clock, right on schedule. I pictured the scene vividly in my mind. 1 second, the massive crystal chandeliers in the dining room would be blazing, illuminating the expensive outfits and fake smiles. The next second, absolute and total darkness. The music pumping through the wireless speakers would cut off instantly. The electric heaters pushing warm air through the vents would die with a pathetic mechanical groan. According to my careful planning, the gas company had already locked the meter hours ago, and the water department had shut off the main valve at the street. If any of their wealthy guests tried to use the lavish guest bathroom, they would quickly discover the toilets did not flush, and the gold-plated faucets were completely dry. It took exactly 14 minutes for my phone to register the first sign of panic. My cell phone resting on the kitchen island lit up with an incoming text message from my mother. It read, "Rebecca, the power just went out in the entire house. Are there any outages reported on your account? Call the electric company right now. We have 40 guests here." I smiled, turning the heat down on the stove. I did not reply. 2 minutes later, another message arrived, this time from Brittany. "Why is the water not working? Jamal is trying to fix the sink. Call the city. This is an emergency." I plated the chicken and called Leo and Mia to the dinner table. We sat down together laughing and talking about their week at school. My phone continued to buzz relentlessly against the marble countertop. The tone of the messages rapidly shifted from confused requests to frantic demands, and finally to pure rage as they realized what had actually happened. Jamal had clearly taken the time to call the utility companies himself. The emergency dispatchers must have informed him that the accounts were intentionally terminated by the account holder. The realization that I had cut their lifelines while they were entertaining half the neighborhood must have hit him like a freight train. My screen flashed with a barrage of texts from his number. "You psychotic woman! You turned off the utilities. Turn them back on right now. My guests are freezing. The caterers cannot cook. You are completely deranged. Turn the power back on or I am calling the police." I calmly sliced a piece of chicken for Mia, ignoring the vibrating piece of glass. "Let him call the police. The police do not handle billing disputes, and they certainly do not force utility companies to turn the power back on for people who do not own the accounts." The house was plunging into freezing temperatures, leaving their fancy guests shivering in the dark, clutching plates of cold food. The sheer embarrassment of having to explain to their friends why they could not keep the lights on in their own house was a punishment fitting for their arrogance. After dinner, I ran a hot, steaming bath for my kids, wrapping them in fluffy towels and tucking them into their warm beds with a storybook. I kissed their foreheads, turned on their nightlights, and walked back into the kitchen to finally check my phone again. There were 42 missed calls and over 60 text messages. The final message was from Jamal, sent just 2 minutes ago. It was not a plea, it was a threat. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my investors? You think you can sabotage my property and get away with it? I am putting my wife and your mother in a hotel, and then I am driving to your apartment. You better unlock your door, Rebecca, because I am going to break it down and make you fix this." Jamal never showed up at my apartment that night. Despite his aggressive text message, he was a coward when it came to actual confrontation without my mother there to back him up. Instead, as I later found out through the neighborhood grapevine, he and Brittany packed overnight bags in the dark and spent the entire weekend freezing in a budget motel 2 towns over because they could not afford the nightly rate at a decent hotel. They left my mother behind to guard the dark, freezing house. By Monday morning, the reality of the situation had firmly set in. The utilities were not going to magically turn back on, and the contractor was scheduled to arrive by noon to begin the massive kitchen demolition. Jamal decided it was time to take charge. He wanted to prove to his wife and my mother that he was the man of the house, fully capable of handling a simple billing dispute. They were standing in the freezing kitchen of the Elm Street house, bundled in heavy winter coats. Jamal dialed the customer service number for the city electric company. To make sure Brittany could witness his supposed alpha male negotiation skills, he proudly placed the phone on the marble island and turned on the speakerphone. A polite female representative answered the line, asking how she could assist him today. Jamal puffed out his chest, using his most condescending corporate voice. "Yes, my name is Jamal, and I need the power restored at my residence on Elm Street immediately." The previous account holder threw a childish tantrum and canceled the service, but I am the new owner of the property. I need a new account opened under my name right now. The representative remained perfectly calm. "I can certainly help you set up a new residential account, sir. I just need to run a standard credit check to establish your service profile. Could you please provide your social security number?" Jamal rattled off his number without hesitation, glancing at Brittany with a smug smile. He honestly believed his own lies about being a wealthy, successful entrepreneur. He expected the representative to apologize for the inconvenience and turn the lights back on within the hour. Instead, a long, agonizing silence filled the freezing kitchen. Only the sound of fingers typing rapidly on a keyboard echoed through the phone speaker. "Sir?" The representative finally said, her tone noticeably shifting from cheerful to strictly procedural. "I have pulled your credit report. Unfortunately, due to a severe history of delinquent payments, multiple accounts in collections, and a current credit score of 480, we cannot open a standard post-pay account for you." Jamal froze. The smug smile completely vanished from his face. Brittany stopped pulling things out of the dark refrigerator and stared at the phone. "What are you talking about?" Jamal snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "Run it again. There has to be a mistake. I own multiple businesses." "There is no mistake, sir," the representative replied firmly. "Your report shows 3 maxed-out credit cards currently in default and a repossessed vehicle from 2 years ago. Company policy requires a high-risk security deposit before we can initiate service at this address. You will need to bring $3,000 in cash or certified funds to our main office downtown today." $3,000, Jamal yelled, slamming his hand against the marble countertop. "For electricity. That is extortion. I am not paying that." "Then we cannot restore the power," the representative stated coldly. "Have a good day, sir." The line disconnected with a sharp click, leaving only the dial tone echoing in the empty, freezing kitchen. Brittany stared at Jamal in absolute horror. 3 maxed-out credit cards, she whispered, her voice trembling. A credit score in the 400s, Jamal. What was she talking about? Where is the money from your real estate flips? Where is the cash you said you had in the bank? Jamal panicked, backing away from the island. "Baby, it is just a clerical error. You know how these corporate systems are. They probably mixed up my file with someone else. I will have my accountant sort it out." "Do not lie to me," Brittany screamed, her voice echoing off the dark walls. "We just bought a Tesla. You said we were rich. You said you had $80,000 in liquid cash. Pay the $3,000 right now, Jamal. Pay it so we do not freeze to death in our own house." Jamal stared at the floor, his jaw clenched tight. "I do not have it," he muttered bitterly. He had just exposed himself as a complete fraud to his own wife in their freezing kitchen. The grand illusion of wealth was over. It was done. Yet instead of packing their bags and admitting total defeat, Jamal did what a narcissist backed into a corner always does. He doubled down on the delusion. He looked at Brittany, whose tear-streaked face was illuminated by the pale winter sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows. He grabbed her shoulders and forcefully told her it was just a temporary cash flow issue. He promised her that once the house was officially in their name next week, they could easily leverage the property to pay off everything. Brittany, desperate to cling to the fantasy life she had relentlessly bragged about to all her friends, swallowed the massive lie. She wiped her eyes and nodded. They absolutely had to keep up appearances. Because in less than 2 hours, a highly sought-after luxury contractor was scheduled to arrive for the massive kitchen demolition. At exactly noon, a heavy-duty white truck pulled into the snowy driveway. A burly man named Vince stepped out carrying a clipboard and a laser measuring tape. Vince walked into the freezing house, his heavy work boots thudding loudly against the expensive hardwood floor. He immediately noticed that he could see his own breath in the foyer. Jamal greeted him with an overly aggressive handshake, completely ignoring the absurd fact that everyone in the house was wearing thick winter coats indoors. Jamal laughed loudly, claiming there was just a minor issue with a blown fuse that the city was supposedly coming to fix later that afternoon. Vince looked highly skeptical but maintained his rigid professionalism. He followed Jamal and Brittany into the dark, freezing kitchen. Jamal began waving his arms around, painting a picture of absolute grandeur. He wanted the main load-bearing walls separating the kitchen and the dining room completely demolished. He demanded custom Italian marble countertops, a high-end commercial-grade gas range, and a massive kitchen island with 2 built-in wine chillers. It was an open-concept entertainment space designed specifically to make their country club friends violently jealous. Vince took meticulous notes, shining a heavy-duty flashlight onto the walls to carefully check for structural supports and old plumbing lines. He tapped his knuckles against the drywall, listening to the thud. After 30 minutes of measuring and calculating, Vince set his bright flashlight down on the cold counter. He tapped his pen against his thick clipboard, looking Jamal directly in the eye. For a full custom job of this massive magnitude, including the expensive structural reinforcement required for removing that load-bearing wall, you are looking at a total cost of $45,000, Vince stated flatly. Jamal did not blink. He nodded sagely, acting as if $45,000 was equivalent to the cost of a cup of coffee. He turned his attention to my mother, who was huddled quietly in the corner, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. Jamal loudly declared that Nancy would simply take out a home equity line of credit against the house to cover the entire renovation. After all, Jamal argued, the house was completely paid off, and this expensive project was simply a smart investment in the overall property value. My mother, completely terrified of ruining their wealthy facade in front of the rugged contractor, forced a tight, awkward smile and nodded in silent agreement. Jamal proudly reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out an expensive silver pen, and signed the bottom of the thick contract with a highly dramatic flourish. He handed the clipboard back to Vince, rubbing his hands together enthusiastically. "Let us get to work," Jamal said, his voice echoing in the room. "Bring in the sledgehammers. Let us open this space up today. I want this wall gone before sunset." Vince calmly took the clipboard, reviewed the fresh signature, and smoothly slid a secondary piece of paper across the dark marble island. "That is great," Vince replied evenly. "I have my entire crew waiting out in the truck, ready to start the demolition immediately. But before a single hammer touches your drywall, my company policy strictly requires a standard 20% down payment to cover the initial labor and the ordering of raw materials. I need a certified check or a direct wire transfer for exactly $9,000 right now." Jamal froze completely. The expensive silver pen slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly against the marble countertop. The arrogant swagger instantly evaporated from his posture. He stared blankly at the payment request form. He had just been humiliated by the electric company regarding a $3,000 deposit, and now he was being asked to produce triple that amount in cash. He slowly turned his head to look at Brittany, whose eyes were wide with rising panic. The silence in the freezing kitchen was deafening. Jamal cleared his throat loudly, desperately trying to recover his shattered pride. He picked the silver pen up off the marble countertop and forced a tight, arrogant laugh. $9,000 in cash today is a bit archaic, do you not think?" Jamal said, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. "As I already explained, Nancy is funding this project through a home equity line of credit. Why do we not just run her application through your financing partners right now? We can easily bypass this ridiculous cash deposit and just wrap the entire 20% directly into the new loan structure." Vince narrowed his eyes. He had been in the luxury remodeling business for 20 years and could smell a fraud from a mile away. But $45,000 was a massive contract. Vince pulled a sleek tablet from his heavy-duty tool bag and loaded the application portal. He handed it to my mother. Nancy, shivering uncontrollably under her wool blanket, nervously typed in her social security number. She handed the tablet back. Vince tapped the screen to submit the inquiry. A bright red banner flashed across the screen instantly. "Denied." Vince scrolled down to read the lender notes. Nancy had a credit score in the low 500s, multiple accounts in collections, and a massive flag for recent property tax defaults. Vince sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. Nancy. This application did not just get denied. It got completely flagged, Vince stated bluntly, not bothering to sugarcoat the situation. You do not qualify for a $500 credit card, let alone a $45,000 construction loan. Jamal immediately stepped in, waving his hands defensively. There is obviously a glitch in the system. The house is completely paid off. Check it again right now. Vince ignored Jamal entirely. He opened his customer database and searched the property address. A previous file popped up from 3 years ago when his company had done some minor roof repairs. Vince looked at the billing history. The invoice had not been paid by Nancy or Jamal. It had been paid by a corporate card belonging to my accounting firm. Vince tapped the screen, finding my direct office number listed as the primary financial guarantor for the property. "Give me 5 minutes," Vince said, turning his back on Jamal. "I need to make a quick phone call outside immediately." Vince walked out the front door, stepping into the freezing driveway, and dialed my office. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a client portfolio when my direct line rang. I checked the caller identification. It was Vince's contracting company. I answered with a knowing smile. "Good afternoon, Vince," I said cheerfully. "Let me guess. You are standing in a freezing kitchen on Elm Street, and Jamal is trying to convince you to start swinging sledgehammers without paying a deposit." Vince chuckled dryly on the other end of the telephone line. "You hit the nail right on the absolute head. Look, I ran Nancy for the financing and it came back completely radioactive," Vince explained. "But I see you on file as the financial guarantor for this property from that roof job we did back in 2021. Are you co-signing for this kitchen remodel? Because if you are putting down the deposit, I can get my guys started right now." I leaned forward in my leather chair. "Vince, listen to me very carefully. I am not co-signing anything. I am not funding this project. In fact, you need to pack up your tools entirely and leave." "Why?" Vince asked, his tone shifting to sheer professional concern. "Because they have absolutely zero equity," I explained calmly. "Nancy lost that house to a tax lien foreclosure. My company is the sole legal owner of the property. They are being legally evicted this Saturday. Jamal and Brittany do not have a single dollar to their names. If your crew knocks down that load-bearing wall, you will never see a dime for the labor, and my corporate attorneys will hold your company fully liable for destroying my property." "Do you fully understand this serious situation right now?" I asked. I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Understood," Vince said coldly. "Thanks for the heads up, Rebecca. I am pulling my guys out." Vince hung up the phone. Back at the house, Vince marched through the front door, his face flushed with anger. He walked straight past Jamal, grabbed his flashlight, and shoved his tablet into his bag. "The financing is completely dead," Jamal, Vince shouted, his voice echoing off the dark walls. "I just spoke with Rebecca. She is the true legal owner of this property, and you people are totally broke. You are a fraud," Vince stormed out. Less than 2 hours after Vince stormed out of that freezing house, the security intercom in my downtown apartment buzzed loudly. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of hot chamomile tea. I pressed the video button. The small screen illuminated to reveal my mother standing in the lobby. She was shivering in her expensive designer coat, her hair disheveled and her makeup carefully smudged to make her look like the ultimate victim. I hesitated for a moment, letting her wait in the cold lobby just a little bit longer before finally pressing the button to unlock the main doors. I stood in my doorway as the elevator dinged. Nancy practically collapsed into my apartment, bringing the smell of cold wind and cheap desperation with her. "Oh, Rebecca," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "It is an absolute disaster. You have to help us." I guided her to the living room sofa, maintaining a polite but firm distance. I did not offer her a cup of tea. I just stood there waiting for the performance to unfold. "Jamal was just trying to be proactive," my mother cried, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. "He started tearing out the old kitchen cabinets himself this morning to save on demolition costs. The whole room is destroyed. The sink is disconnected, the drywall is completely ripped open, and now that contractor Vince refuses to do the job because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about my credit report. We have 40 people coming over this Saturday for the grand housewarming party. The caterers are already paid. We cannot host our friends in a freezing house with a demolished kitchen. It will ruin our reputation forever." I crossed my arms, looking down at her. "And what exactly does this have to do with me, Mom? You threw me out into a blizzard, remember?" My mother looked up, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "That was just a silly misunderstanding, sweetheart. You know how high emotions run on holidays. We are family. Family forgives and forgets. I need a massive favor, Rebecca. I need you to write me a check for $10,000 right now. Just a short-term loan so I can hire a new emergency crew to fix the kitchen and turn the utilities back on before Saturday. Jamal will pay you back the second his real estate deal closes next month. I promise. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity. She had allowed Jamal to humiliate me. She had thrown her own grandchildren into the snow, and now she was sitting on my couch, demanding $10,000 to save face at a party I was banned from attending. No, I said calmly. The single syllable hung in the air, sharp and absolute. My mother blinked, confused. What do you mean, no, Rebecca? I am your mother. I am begging you. I said, no, Mom. I am not giving you a single dime. I am not funding Jamal's delusions, and I am certainly not paying to fix a house you claim you are giving to Brittany. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences in the dark. The transformation was instantaneous. The fake tears completely vanished, drying up in less than a second. Her shoulders stiffened and her face twisted into a mask of pure vicious hatred. She stood up from the couch, her posture rigid and aggressive. You greedy, miserable little witch! Nancy spat, her voice trembling with venom. I knew you would do this. I knew you would sit in your warm apartment and gloat while your own family suffers. You planned this, did you not? You called the utility companies and made up lies to get them shut off just to ruin Brittany's special day. I did not flinch. I just walked over to the front door and opened it wide. It is time for you to leave, Mom. Nancy marched toward the door, stopping right in front of me to deliver her final threat. You are completely dead to me, Rebecca. Do you hear me? Dead. I am going to host that party this Saturday, no matter what it takes. We will run generators. We will serve food by candlelight. I do not care. That party is happening, and I am officially signing that house over to Jamal and Brittany right in front of everyone. They are my real family. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely mistake. She stormed out into the hallway. I watched her march toward the elevators, her heels clicking angrily against the tile floor. I calmly shut my front door and locked the deadbolt. Let her have her candlelit party. The final stage was officially set for this upcoming Saturday evening. I walked away from the locked door, the echo of my mother's heels fading into the quiet apartment. I moved back to the kitchen island where my cold cup of tea sat next to the mail stack. Right in the middle was a thick cardboard envelope bearing the FedEx logo. Delivered to my office earlier that afternoon, I had brought it home unopened, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment had officially arrived. I picked up a silver letter opener and sliced through the heavy flap. I reached inside and pulled out a stack of crisp legal documents. The top page featured the embossed golden seal of the county court. I spread the papers across the marble countertop, smoothing them out under the warm glow of the pendant lights. There it was, the finalized warranty deed, the legal culmination of months of calculated waiting. The document clearly stated that due to the completed tax lien foreclosure, the Elm Street property was now entirely vested in my limited liability company. There were no mortgages left to contest it. There were no loopholes for Jamal to exploit. The county judge's signature at the bottom legally stripped my mother of any ownership rights she possessed. The quitclaim deed she planned to hand to Jamal and Brittany this weekend was worthless. They were currently squatting in a house they did not own, planning a renovation they could not afford to celebrate a transfer of wealth that did not exist. I traced the raised seal with my finger, feeling absolute certainty. I walked over to the calendar pinned to the corkboard. Saturday the 24th was circled in red ink. My mother had proudly declared the party would start at 6 in the evening, giving guests enough time to arrive, mingle in the dark, and prepare for the grand announcement at 7. She was willing to humiliate herself by hosting a luxury event without electricity or running water just to maintain the illusion that Jamal was a successful real estate mogul. It was a level of delusion that required a very public wake-up call. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the sheriff's office. I navigated the automated menu, pressing the extension for the Civil Process Division. A gruff voice answered the line. Good afternoon, Civil Division, Deputy Miller speaking. How can I help you today? Good afternoon, Deputy Miller, I replied, keeping my voice highly professional. My name is Rebecca, and I am the managing director of the limited liability company that recently acquired the property on Elm Street through a county tax foreclosure. I have the finalized warranty deed and a court-ordered writ of possession signed by the judge. I need to schedule a civil standby to formally execute the eviction and take physical possession of the property. The deputy paused, pulling up the address in his system. Ah, yes, I see the file right here, ma'am, he confirmed. The judge signed off on the writ yesterday. We can schedule a unit to go out there and clear the premises. Since it is a finalized tax foreclosure, the current occupants have exhausted all legal stay periods. When would you like us to execute the order? I looked back at the calendar, my eyes locking onto the red circle. This Saturday, I stated clearly, I need the deputies to arrive at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. Deputy Miller hesitated. Saturday evening at 7, ma'am. We usually handle these things during standard morning business hours. Is there a specific reason for a Saturday evening execution? Yes, there is. I answered, my tone unwavering. The unauthorized occupants have scheduled a large gathering at the property that evening. Given their previous hostile behavior and the sheer number of people expected on site, I believe it is a high-risk situation. Having uniformed deputies present to enforce the writ is necessary to ensure a peaceful transfer of possession and avoid violent altercations. That makes perfect sense, he agreed. We definitely want to avoid any escalating conflicts. I will put you on the schedule for a civil standby this Saturday at 1900 hours. I will assign 2 armed deputies to meet you at the end of the street. Make sure you bring the original stamped deed and your valid photo identification. I will definitely have everything completely ready, I assured him. Thank you for all your assistance, Deputy. I hung up the heavy phone and set it back down on the cold marble counter. The trap was now completely set, locked and armed. My mother desperately wanted a highly dramatic stage for her grand presentation. I was going to give her a spectacular show that none of her wealthy, judgmental friends would ever forget. Saturday evening arrived with a biting frost that coated the suburban lawns in a thick sheet of ice. Despite the freezing temperatures, Elm Street was completely lined with expensive luxury vehicles. My mother had clearly gone completely out of her way to ensure the neighborhood knew about the grand housewarming party. From my parked car down the street, I could hear the loud, obnoxious mechanical roar of 2 heavy-duty industrial generators sitting on the snow-covered front lawn. Thick black cables snaked through the front door, powering a series of strategically placed space heaters and bright floor lamps inside. They were desperately trying to mask the fact that the actual electrical grid was completely dead. I sat quietly in the front seat, watching the silhouettes of people mingling through the frosted bay windows. My dashboard clock glowed brightly, reading 6:45. I had 15 minutes to kill before the deputies arrived. Inside the house, the atmosphere was a masterclass in aggressive delusion. Through the social media live streams, Brittany was obsessively posting, I had a perfect digital front row seat to the entire disaster. The house was absolutely packed. Neighbors, extended family members, and a swarm of Jamal and his pretentious business associates crowded into the living room. Brittany had hired an outrageously expensive catering company that specialized in artisan appetizers. Waiters in crisp white shirts navigated the crowded room carrying silver trays of caviar blinis and smoked salmon crostini. They had to use sterno chafing fuel cans to heat the food because the stove was completely non-functional. Brittany was wearing a shimmering gold cocktail dress, laughing loudly and waving her champagne glass around as she guided guests through the freezing hallways. She enthusiastically pointed to the half-demolished kitchen as if it were a brilliant architectural exhibit. She loudly explained to anyone who would listen that the exposed drywall and torn-up flooring were just the messy beginnings of a magnificent open-concept masterpiece. My mother was working the room with equal fervor. Nancy wore a tailored velvet gown, clutching a glass of red wine, and playing the role of the generous matriarch to absolute perfection. I watched on the phone screen as Patricia and Diane, her judgmental country club friends, hovered around her. Nancy humbly accepted their constant praise, loudly explaining how happy she was to pass the family estate down to the next generation. She told them that keeping wealth within the family was the most important legacy a mother could leave. Not a single person in that crowded room knew that the caviar was paid for with a maxed out credit card, the heat was running on rented diesel, and the benevolent matriarch was essentially completely bankrupt. At exactly 6:55, Jamal decided it was time for the main event. In the live stream video, he clinked a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the loud chatter, drawing the attention of every single guest. Jamal stood proudly in the center of the half-demolished kitchen, using a slab of broken drywall as a makeshift podium. He wore a custom-fitted burgundy suit, his gold watch catching the glare of the generator-powered floodlights. He wrapped his arm tightly around the waist of Brittany, pulling her close as the crowd quieted down. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate this massive milestone with us," Jamal began, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "As many of you know, I have been rapidly expanding my commercial real estate portfolio over the past year. But true wealth always starts right at home. Tonight is not just a housewarming party. It is the official launch of a brand new era for our family empire." The guests murmured in polite agreement, raising their glasses. Jamal smiled, soaking in the admiration. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment paper. I immediately recognized it. It was the worthless quitclaim deed I had signed in my office just a few days ago. Jamal held the document high in the air, brandishing it like a championship trophy for the entire room to see. "Thanks to the incredible generosity of my amazing mother-in-law, Nancy, and the legal surrender of certain bitter individuals who simply could not handle our success, this beautiful estate is now officially ours," Jamal announced triumphantly. "We hold the deed. We hold the future. Here is to building an empire that no one can ever tear down." The room erupted in loud applause. My mother wiped a tear from her eye, beaming with pride. Brittany kissed Jamal on the cheek, soaking in the envy of her peers. Little did they know, their imaginary empire was about to collapse. The applause was still ringing through the dark, freezing house, echoing off the exposed studs of the half-demolished kitchen. Jamal stood tall, basking in the adoration of his peers, holding that completely worthless piece of paper high above his head. Brittany was practically glowing, raising her champagne flute to toast their stolen future. I stepped out of my car into the freezing night air. Two heavy patrol vehicles pulled up silently to the curb behind me, their headlights cutting through the falling snow. Deputy Miller and his partner stepped out. They were tall, imposing men wearing thick winter uniform jackets and heavy utility belts that jingled slightly as they walked. "Are you Rebecca, Deputy Miller?" asked, his breath pluming in the cold air. I nodded, handing him the thick manila envelope containing the court-stamped warranty deed and the writ of possession. He pulled a flashlight from his belt, quickly reviewing the documents under the bright beam. "Everything is in order," he confirmed, handing the original papers back to me. "Let us go clear your property, ma'am." I walked up the snowy driveway, flanked by the two armed officers. I did not knock. I reached out and turned the heavy brass handle. The heavy oak door swung open, hitting the interior wall with a loud, reverberating thud. A violent gust of icy wind swept into the crowded foyer, instantly extinguishing the decorative candles my mother had placed along the entryway table. The sudden blast of cold air shocked the guests nearest to the door, causing them to gasp and step back. The polite, wealthy chatter died instantly. It was as if someone had flipped a massive switch, plunging the entire party into dead silence. The only sound left in the house was the obnoxious mechanical roar of the rented diesel generators sitting out on the front lawn. The crowd of guests, wearing their expensive coats and holding their plates of cold caviar, turned to stare at the doorway. When they saw the two fully uniformed sheriff deputies stepping into the foyer, their eyes went wide with absolute shock. The sea of people slowly began to part, shuffling nervously out of the way to clear a direct path into the living room. I stepped through the parted crowd, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely unreadable. My mother was standing near the makeshift bar, laughing with Patricia and Diane, when she finally noticed the sudden silence. She turned around, a polite, confused smile still plastered across her face. When she saw me walking toward her, flanked by law enforcement, all the color instantly drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened in shock, but no sound came out. For a split second, the polished, aristocratic facade completely shattered, revealing the terrified, bankrupt woman hiding underneath. But Nancy was a master manipulator, and she quickly recovered her composure. Her face flushed with sudden violent rage. She slammed her wine glass down onto a nearby table, spilling dark red liquid across the white linen cloth. She marched right through the crowd, pointing a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" Nancy shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "How dare you bring the police into my home during a private family event? You are completely out of your mind." She did not even wait for me to answer. She immediately turned her attention to Deputy Miller, attempting to use her most authoritative upper-class tone. "Officers, I demand that you arrest this woman immediately," my mother commanded, gesturing wildly toward me. "She is trespassing on private property. She has been stalking and harassing my family all week, and now she is trying to ruin my daughter's housewarming party. I want her removed from my house this very second, and I want to press full criminal charges." Deputy Miller did not flinch. He just looked at her with a calm, practiced expression of professional boredom. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice and step back," the deputy instructed firmly, resting his hand casually near his utility belt. My mother gasped completely, offended that a police officer was not immediately bowing to her demands. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded loudly, making sure her country club friends were watching. "This is my house. I just legally transferred the deed to my son-in-law tonight. She has absolutely no right to be here. Remove her." Jamal abruptly jumped down from his broken drywall podium, clutching the useless paper tightly in his right hand. He shoved his way to the front of the whispering crowd, puffing out his tailored suit jacket. He glared at me with absolute contempt, completely ready to defend his imaginary new kingdom. Jamal stepped directly into Deputy Miller's personal space, aggressively waving the folded parchment paper in the air. "Gentlemen, there has obviously been a massive misunderstanding here," Jamal announced, projecting his voice loudly so every single guest in the freezing room could hear him. "This woman is my bitter sister-in-law. She has a history of mental instability and severe jealousy issues. You are completely wasting your valuable time. This is my property. I am the sole legal owner of this estate, and I did not authorize anyone to call law enforcement." He forcefully thrust the document toward the two officers. "Right here in my hand is a fully executed quitclaim deed." Jamal continued, his tone dripping with profound arrogance. "Nancy formally transferred the entire estate to my wife and me. And if you look right at the bottom of the page, you will see Rebecca's own signature. She willingly signed away every single right she ever had to this house just a few days ago in her own office. She legally surrendered her claim because she knew she could not fight my legal team." Jamal turned away from the deputies and faced the crowded room, opening his arms wide as if welcoming applause. "Look at her, everyone," he mocked, pointing a rigid finger directly at my face. "Look at how incredibly desperate she is. She is so utterly obsessed with my success that she actually faked a police call to ruin my housewarming party. She cut the power to the house earlier today like a petulant child, and now she is staging this pathetic stunt. It is genuinely sad." "You are pathetic, Rebecca. Did you honestly think you could walk in here with a couple of cops and magically steal my house?" Brittany stepped up right next to him, crossing her arms and shaking her head with an overly dramatic sigh. "I told you we should have gotten a restraining order against her," Jamal, Brittany said loudly. "She just cannot stand the fact that Mom loves us more and wanted us to have the family home. She has been trying to sabotage my happiness since we were kids." Patricia and Diane nodded sympathetically from the corner, whispering to each other about my supposed mental breakdown. Several of Jamal's wealthy business associates began to chuckle, shaking their heads at my apparent humiliation. Empowered by the laughter of his peers, Jamal turned his attention back to Deputy Miller. He leaned in closer, adopting a patronizing tone. "So, officers, now that you know the actual truth, I suggest you escort this crazy woman off my property before I decide to press charges for filing a false police report. We are trying to host a luxury event here, and you are tracking snow onto my expensive hardwood floors." Deputy Miller did not move a single muscle. He did not blink. He simply reached out his large gloved hand. "Let me see that document, sir." The deputy requested, his voice dangerously calm and completely devoid of any emotion. Jamal smirked triumphantly. He slapped the quitclaim deed into the officer's outstretched hand with a loud smack. "Read it and weep," Officer Jamal boasted, adjusting his tailored suit jacket and flashing a brilliant smile at the crowd. "It is completely ironclad. My corporate lawyers drafted it themselves." Deputy Miller clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight again. He shined the bright beam directly onto the expensive parchment paper. He read the text in absolute silence for exactly 10 seconds. The entire room waited with bated breath, fully expecting the officer to apologize to Jamal and drag me out of the house in handcuffs. Instead, the deputy slowly lowered the flashlight. He looked at the paper, then looked back up at Jamal with an expression of sheer pity. "Sir, this is a standard quitclaim deed," Deputy Miller stated flatly, his deep voice carrying easily across the silent room. Jamal nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the officer's tone. "Exactly," Jamal replied. "It proves Nancy transferred her ownership to me, and Rebecca completely waived her rights." Deputy Miller let out a short, heavy sigh. He slowly turned his head away from Jamal and looked directly at me. The large officer handed the worthless piece of paper back to Jamal without a second glance. The deputy rested his hand on his heavy utility belt and gave me a respectful nod. "Ma'am," the deputy said, addressing me clearly so the entire room could hear, "would you like to explain the actual legal situation to this gentleman, or would you prefer I just order them to start packing their bags?" I took a slow, deep breath, relishing the absolute perfection of this moment. I stepped forward, looking right into Jamal's incredibly confused eyes, finally ready to deliver the ultimate blow he truly deserved. "You really thought you outsmarted me, did you not, Jamal?" I asked, my voice cutting through the freezing air of the living room with absolute clarity. "You marched into my office, insulted my career, and forced me to sign away a house. But you are not a visionary entrepreneur. You are just a foolish, greedy man who never actually reads the fine print." I turned my gaze away from his stunned face and looked directly at my mother. Nancy was trembling now, clutching her expensive velvet gown, as if it could somehow protect her from the truth. "For the past 3 years, my mother has completely ignored her property taxes," I announced loudly, making sure my voice reached every single person in the crowded room. "She spent her money on country club memberships, luxury vacations, and designer clothes to impress all of you. By February of this year, she owed the county $36,000 in back taxes and penalties. The county was preparing to seize this property and sell it at a public auction." Loud, dramatic gasps quickly echoed through the silent room. Patricia and Diane stared at my mother in absolute horror. Nancy opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She immediately came crying to me. Of course, I continued pacing slowly across the hardwood floor. She assumed I would just quietly write a check and bail her out like I always do. She genuinely thought I handed her a $36,000 gift to save her precious image. But I did not pay her tax bill. Instead, I had my limited liability company purchase the county tax lien certificate. Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing as his limited legal knowledge completely failed him. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice losing its arrogant boom. "She signed the quitclaim deed. You signed it too." I stopped pacing and faced him directly. "Buying a tax lien means I bought her debt from the county, Jamal," I explained slowly, as if speaking to a slow child. "Under state law, my mother had exactly 6 months to redeem that certificate by paying my company back the $36,000 plus interest. But she never did. She threw all the legal notices in the garbage because she thought the problem was magically solved." When the full 6-month redemption period completely expired in August, my attorneys filed for a tax lien foreclosure. I pointed to the thick manila envelope Deputy Miller was holding. Just yesterday morning, a county judge signed the final order. I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. The judge completely stripped Nancy of all ownership rights to this estate. The property was legally transferred to my company. The deed was recorded, and the title is absolutely clear of any other claims or mortgages. I took a step closer to Jamal, looking down at the folded piece of parchment paper still clutched tightly in his hand. So when you brought that quitclaim deed into my office and demanded my signature, I signed it gladly, I told him, a cold smile forming on my lips. Because a quitclaim deed only transfers whatever interest the grantor currently holds. And since my mother already lost this house to my company through a court-ordered foreclosure, she held zero interest. You cannot quitclaim a house you no longer own, Jamal. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. The sheer weight of my words crashed down on Jamal and Brittany, crushing their imaginary empire into dust. Jamal stared down at the paper in his hand, his mouth hanging open as the horrifying realization finally set in. It was a completely worthless piece of paper. He had thrown a massive, expensive housewarming party in a house he was legally trespassing in. Brittany let out a loud, high-pitched gasp, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal glass shattered violently against the hardwood floor, sending sparkling wine splashing across Jamal's expensive leather shoes. "No!" she shrieked, grabbing Jamal's arm and shaking it frantically. "Tell me she is lying, Jamal. Tell me this is not happening. We just invited everyone we know to celebrate our new house. We bought a Tesla based on this equity. We signed a $45,000 remodeling contract today. You told me we were incredibly rich." Jamal could not speak. His face turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked at Deputy Miller, hoping for salvation, but the officer simply nodded in confirmation. "The deed is completely valid, sir," the deputy said firmly. "Rebecca is the sole legal owner of this entire property. Your document is entirely void." My mother covered her face with both hands, letting out a wretched sob as her wealthy friends began whispering furiously. The harsh truth was finally exposed completely. I turned back to Deputy Miller, who was patiently observing the total collapse of my family's fabricated reality. Without saying another word, I unclasped the heavy manila envelope I had been holding at my side and slid out the original court-stamped warranty deed. The thick parchment felt heavy with justice. I handed it directly to the deputy. He raised his flashlight again, the bright beam illuminating the official golden seal of the county court and the unmistakable signature of the presiding judge. He took his time, his eyes scanning the dense legal text line by line. The silence in the room was so profound you could hear the soft hum of the rented generators vibrating through the floorboards. After what felt like an eternity to the terrified people standing around me, Deputy Miller lowered his flashlight. He folded the heavy document and handed it back to me with a respectful nod. He then turned his imposing figure toward Jamal, who was still clutching his worthless quitclaim deed like a life preserver. "Sir, I have verified the court documents," Deputy Miller announced, his deep voice carrying an undeniable finality. "This warranty deed is fully executed and legally binding. Your mother lost this property entirely to a tax foreclosure. She had absolutely no legal right to transfer the deed to you or anyone else. As of this moment, Rebecca is the sole legal owner of this entire estate, which means every single person standing in this room right now, including you and your wife, is currently trespassing on private property." The word trespassing echoed through the dark, freezing living room like a gunshot. The impact was immediate and devastating. The wealthy neighbors, extended family members, and pretentious business associates all began whispering furiously. The carefully constructed illusion of Jamal and Brittany's massive wealth evaporated instantly, replaced by the ugly reality of their absolute bankruptcy. A woman standing near the front of the crowd, wearing a heavy mink coat, quietly set her plate of cold caviar down on a side table and took a distinct step away from Brittany. Other guests followed suit, exchanging horrified glances. They had been invited to a luxury housewarming party only to discover they were standing in a stolen house with the power shut off, surrounded by frauds. Jamal's face contorted with a mixture of intense panic and sheer rage. He could not accept that he had been so completely outplayed. "This is a mistake," Jamal stammered, stepping aggressively toward the deputy. "You cannot just come in here and declare her the owner based on one piece of paper. I have a corporate legal team. I will have this reversed by Monday morning. I am a successful entrepreneur and I demand you leave my house." Deputy Miller immediately placed his hand firmly on his utility belt, stepping right into Jamal's path to cut off his advance. "Sir, if you take one more step toward me or the property owner, you will be leaving this house in handcuffs," the deputy warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous low octave. "I strongly suggest you calm down and accept the reality of your situation. You do not have a legal team, and you certainly do not own this house. You are a squatter." The word squatter hit Jamal like a physical blow. His shoulders slumped and he took a shaky step backward. Brittany let out another piercing wail. She turned her furious, tear-filled eyes toward my mother, who was still hiding her face in her hands. "Mom, how could you do this to us?" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You told us the house was paid off. You told Jamal we could use the equity to fund his real estate flips. You made us hire that expensive contractor today. We owe $9,000 for a kitchen demolition in a house we do not even own. We are completely ruined." Nancy slowly lowered her hands, her face pale and streaked with dark mascara. She looked at her golden child, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I could fix it," Nancy sobbed weakly. "I thought if I just signed the paper, Rebecca would not have the heart to kick us all out. I thought family meant something to her." "You thought you could steal from me and humiliate me," I corrected her coldly, my voice cutting through her pathetic excuses. "You thought I was weak, but I am the one holding the deed." The entire room watched in absolute shock as the perfect suburban family completely tore itself apart. The wealthy guests who had been praising my mother just 20 minutes ago were now staring at her with profound disgust. The reality was absolutely undeniable. It was finally over. I owned everything. They had completely lost. Deputy Miller did not give them a single moment to process their shattered reality. He stepped into the center of the room, raising his voice to ensure everyone heard him over the hum of the outdoor generators. "Listen up," the deputy commanded, his tone shifting into pure tactical enforcement. "The legal owner of this property has formally requested your removal. Under the authority of this court, ordered writ, every unauthorized occupant has exactly 30 minutes to gather whatever personal belongings will fit into their personal vehicles and vacate these premises. If you are still standing on this property when my watch hits 7:45, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing and escorted to the county jail." The words hung in this freezing air, sparking an immediate frenzy of absolute panic. The remaining guests did not need to be told twice. The wealthy neighbors and pretentious business associates completely abandoned their half-eaten plates of cold catering and practically sprinted toward the front door. No one wanted to be associated with this spectacular public humiliation. Within seconds, the grand housewarming party dissolved into a frantic stampede of luxury coats fleeing into the snowy night. Brittany collapsed onto a dusty pile of torn drywall in the corner of the ruined kitchen. She began crying hysterically, her loud, piercing wails echoing through the dark house. The pristine, shimmering gold cocktail dress she had flaunted all evening was now covered in white plaster dust. Thick streaks of expensive black mascara ran down her cheeks, completely destroying her perfectly contoured makeup. She grabbed fistfuls of her own blonde hair, rocking back and forth, as the reality of her sudden homelessness crashed down on her. "Where are we supposed to go?" she screamed, her voice cracking violently. "We do not have any money for a hotel. We do not have anywhere to live." Jamal ignored his hysterical wife completely. His massive ego simply refused to accept such a crushing defeat. He pulled his smartphone from his tailored suit jacket, his fingers trembling wildly as he scrolled through his contacts. I am calling my legal team right now, Jamal announced to the room, though his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. This is an illegal eviction. You cannot just kick people out into the snow with 30 minutes' notice. I have a retainer with one of the best corporate attorneys in the city. He will file an emergency injunction immediately. He tapped the screen and held the phone up to his ear. The living room was now completely empty of guests, leaving only me, the two armed deputies, and the three frauds standing in the freezing darkness. Jamal paced back and forth across the hardwood floor, waiting for the call to connect. When someone finally answered, Jamal immediately launched into his arrogant tirade. "Yes, Richard, it is. Jamal," he barked, trying to sound authoritative. "I have a couple of rogue sheriff deputies standing in my living room, trying to execute a bogus eviction. Some bitter family member bought a tax lien behind our backs and claims she owns the estate. I need you to file a stay of execution right now and get these cops out of my house." Because the room was so quiet, the voice of the attorney on the other end of the line was clearly audible. Richard let out a loud, genuine laugh. "A tax lien foreclosure," the lawyer asked, his amusement completely unfiltered. Jamal did a judge sign a final warranty deed transferring the property. "Yes, but it is completely fraudulent," Jamal insisted, his face turning a deep shade of red. "We have a quitclaim deed from my mother-in-law." Richard laughed even harder. "Jamal, a tax foreclosure completely wipes out all previous deeds. Your mother-in-law owned nothing. You own nothing. There is no emergency injunction for a finalized tax lien execution. If the sheriff is standing in your living room giving you 30 minutes to leave, I strongly suggest you put down the phone and start packing your bags. You have absolutely no case, and I am not billing hours for a lost cause. Do not call me again." The line went dead with a sharp beep. Jamal stood frozen, staring blankly at his phone screen. His entire fake corporate persona evaporated in that single moment. He was not a real estate mogul. He was just a broke, arrogant man standing in a dark, freezing house he did not own, with a wife having a complete nervous breakdown on a pile of garbage. Deputy Miller checked his heavy wristwatch and looked directly at Jamal. "You now have exactly 22 minutes left to vacate my property, sir," the deputy stated coldly, crossing his massive arms over his heavy utility belt. "I strongly suggest you start packing." The remaining guests did not even bother using the front door. The sheer embarrassment of walking past the armed sheriff deputies was too much for my mother's pretentious country club friends and Jamal's fake business associates. They scrambled toward the back of the house, practically shoving each other out the patio doors and into the freezing backyard. I could hear the desperate crunch of expensive leather shoes running across the snow-covered grass as they frantically circled the property to reach their luxury cars parked on the street. Engines roared to life, one by one, tires spinning on the icy pavement as they sped away into the night, desperate to escape the absolute disaster my family had become. Inside the house, the remaining 20 minutes dissolved into pure, unfiltered chaos. Deputy Miller and his partner stood like stone statues in the foyer, making sure nothing of actual value was taken. Jamal, Brittany, and my mother frantically ran through the dark, freezing hallways, grabbing whatever they could carry. They shoved designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and useless vanity items into black garbage bags because they did not even have the time to find their luggage. They looked like common thieves burglarizing their own supposed castle. When the deputies finally ordered them to leave, they stumbled blindly through the heavy oak front door and spilled clumsily onto the snow-covered front lawn. I stepped out onto the porch right behind them, zipping up my coat against the biting wind. The heavy industrial generators were still roaring on the grass, casting harsh, artificial light over the ugly scene. The polished picture-perfect family dynamic my mother had spent decades carefully curating completely shattered the second their expensive shoes hit the icy driveway. Jamal threw a heavy garbage bag full of custom suits into the snow and turned on my mother with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "You lied to me!" Nancy Jamal screamed, his voice raw with absolute fury. "You told me this house was completely paid off. You told me we were sitting on nearly $1 million in equity." I brought a luxury contractor in here today and signed a $45,000 demolition contract because you swore the money was guaranteed. I am legally bound to that debt, and now I find out you are completely bankrupt. My mother backed away, clutching a handful of velvet dresses to her chest. She tried to cry, hoping her tears would manipulate him the way they always manipulated everyone else. Jamal, please, she sobbed loudly. I did not know Rebecca would do something this cruel. I was just trying to protect our family. Protect us! Jamal roared, stepping closer to her. You completely destroyed us. You lost the house to taxes because you are a pathetic, irresponsible fraud. You spent all your money trying to look rich for your stupid country club friends, and you dragged me down with you. That was the breaking point for Brittany. She dropped her oversized designer purse onto the icy driveway and violently shoved Jamal backward. Do not you dare talk to my mother like that! Brittany shrieked, her face stained with black mascara and running makeup. You are the fraud, Jamal. You walk around acting like this incredible real estate mogul, but you do not have a single dollar to your name. You could not even pay a $3,000 deposit to get the electricity turned back on today. Jamal snapped his attention to his wife, his eyes wide with sheer rage. Oh, so now I am the problem, he yelled, pointing a finger in her face. I spent the last 3 years funding your ridiculous shopping habits. I bought you a Tesla just so you could show off to your pathetic friends. You bought it on credit, Jamal. Brittany screamed right back, her voice echoing down the empty street. You are completely broke. You have a credit score in the 400s. I only married you because you promised me a lifestyle you clearly cannot provide. You are just a pathetic, totally broke loser. I stood quietly on this porch, leaning against the wooden railing, watching the spectacular implosion. The golden child, the visionary entrepreneur, and the benevolent matriarch were screaming, crying, and tearing each other apart like wild animals fighting over scraps in the snow. There was absolutely no loyalty. There was no love. Their entire relationship was built on a fragile foundation of money status and mutual delusion. The second the money vanished, they turned on each other with a viciousness that was genuinely terrifying to witness. They had spent my entire life telling me I was the toxic one, the outsider who did not understand family values. Yet here they were, finally proving exactly who they truly were to everyone. The screaming match on the snowy driveway continued to escalate, but the vicious words were beginning to lose their heat against the freezing winter air. As Jamal and Brittany hurled increasingly ugly insults at each other, tearing apart their fake marriage piece by piece, my mother slowly seemed to realize that her golden children could not save her. She looked at Jamal, who was frantically trying to shove his expensive suits into the trunk of a leased car he probably could no longer afford. She looked at Brittany, who was sitting in the snow, sobbing uncontrollably and ruining her designer dress. The terrifying reality of absolute homelessness finally pierced through my mother's thick wall of delusion. She had no money, no credit, and no wealthy friends left to call. Her country club peers had abandoned her the second the sheriff deputies arrived. She was completely alone. My mother slowly turned away from the chaotic argument and looked up at the porch. I was still standing there, leaning casually against the wooden railing, watching the snow fall around the glow of the porch light. Nancy took a hesitant step toward me, then another. Her expensive velvet gown dragged through the wet snow, soaking the hem and leaving a dark trail behind her. She reached the bottom of the wooden porch steps and stopped. She looked up at me, her face pale and trembling in the freezing wind. When she realized I was not going to invite her inside, she resorted to the only weapon she had left: pure weaponized guilt. She grabbed the icy wooden handrail and practically dragged herself up the steps, her knees buckling dramatically. She collapsed onto the wooden floorboards right at my feet, clutching the hem of my winter coat. "Rebecca, please," she sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. "You cannot do this to me. I am your mother. I am a frail older woman. I will freeze to death out here in the cold. You cannot just throw me out into the street like a stray dog. I have nowhere else to go." I looked down at her. She was putting on a spectacular performance. Her tears flowed freely, freezing against her cold cheeks. She gasped for air, clutching her chest, as if her heart were physically breaking. Just a few hours ago, she was standing in a luxury gown holding a glass of expensive wine, laughing with her friends about how she was giving away my inheritance. Now she was a shivering mess on my porch, begging for mercy from the daughter she had spent decades emotionally abusing. "I will do anything, Rebecca," she pleaded, her fingers digging into the fabric of my coat. "Just let me stay in the unfinished basement. I will not come upstairs. I will not bother you or the children. I will just take a small blanket and sleep on the concrete floor. You will not even know I am there. Please have some compassion. I raised you. I fed you. I sacrificed my youth for you. You owe me this much. Just let me stay in the basement until I can figure things out." I did not step back. I did not pull my coat away from her desperate grasp. I simply stared down into her tear-filled eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, hardened resolve. My mind instantly flashed back to Thanksgiving night. I remembered standing on this exact same porch in this exact same freezing weather. I remembered the way my 6-year-old daughter Mia had shivered her teeth, chattering violently while she clutched my hand. I remembered the confused, terrified look on my 8-year-old son Leo's face when his own grandmother threw his winter coat into the snow and slammed the heavy oak door in his face. Nancy had not shown a single ounce of mercy or compassion for her own grandchildren that night. She had discarded us with a triumphant smirk, fully believing she had secured her wealthy future with Jamal and Brittany. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. "Do you remember what you told me on Thanksgiving night when I asked you not to force my children out into the blizzard before they had even finished their dinner?" Nancy froze, her sobbing suddenly halting as she looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. She remembered. I could see the exact moment the memory hit her. "You told me you did not care," I reminded her, enunciating every single word with brutal clarity. "You threw our coats into the snow and told me to get off your property. You chose your precious golden child. You chose the illusion of wealth. You made your bed, Mom. Now you have to sleep in it." My mother stared up at me, the final remnants of her manipulative facade crumbling into genuine despair. She realized, perhaps for the very first time in her entire life, that her tears held absolutely no power over me anymore. The well of my empathy had completely run dry, permanently exhausted by decades of her relentless selfishness and cruel favoritism. I looked past her trembling figure, letting my eyes sweep over the chaotic scene still unfolding on the icy driveway. Jamal was aggressively slamming the trunk of his leased car, screaming one final vicious insult at Brittany. Brittany was hyperventilating, struggling to stand up in her ruined designer dress, while desperately clutching a garbage bag full of shoes. They were entirely consumed by their own miserable downfall, completely ignoring the woman who had sacrificed her financial stability to buy their conditional love. I brought my attention back to the shivering woman kneeling at my feet. "You wanted to know what family really means to me, Mom?" I asked quietly, ensuring my words sliced through the freezing winter wind with surgical precision. "It means protecting the people who actually depend on you. It means never throwing your own grandchildren out into a blizzard just to protect the fragile ego of a lying man. You made a definitive choice on Thanksgiving night. You looked at my freezing children, and you felt absolutely nothing. You slammed this very door in our faces without a second thought. So do not kneel here and beg me for a compassion you have never once shown me." Nancy opened her mouth, a pathetic, wavering gasp escaping her lips, but she could not form a single coherent word. The absolute finality in my voice paralyzed her. "Get up," I commanded softly. "The Motel 6 is just 2 miles down the highway. I hear they leave the light on for you. Get off my porch." My mother slowly pulled her hands away from my winter coat. She looked like a hollow shell of the arrogant, pretentious woman who had hosted that luxury party just an hour ago. She gripped the icy wooden handrail and awkwardly dragged herself to her feet. Without saying another word, she turned her back on me and carefully descended the wooden steps. She did not walk toward Jamal or Brittany. She just wrapped her arms tightly around her own body, and began walking down the snow-covered sidewalk, disappearing into the dark, freezing suburban night. I watched her go until she was completely swallowed by the shadows. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I turned around and walked toward the heavy oak front door. Deputy Miller and his partner were standing inside the foyer, finishing up their final sweep of the premises. "The house is completely clear, ma'am," the deputy confirmed, stepping out onto the porch. "If they return and try to trespass, you call us immediately." "Thank you, officers," I replied sincerely. "Have a safe night." I stepped over the threshold and walked inside. I grabbed the heavy brass handle and pulled the door shut. The solid, reverberating thud echoed through the silent house, followed by the sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding firmly into place. I was finally alone. I stood in the center of the dark foyer, breathing in the cold, still air. Outside, the rented generators were finally running out of diesel, their loud mechanical roars sputtering and dying away one by one. True silence descended upon the Elm Street property for the first time in decades. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and activated the flashlight, casting a bright white beam across the hardwood floors. I walked slowly through the quiet, empty halls of my childhood home. I passed the dining room where the expensive crystal glasses and half-eaten plates of cold catering still sat abandoned on the long mahogany table. I walked into the half-demolished kitchen, shining my light over the exposed studs and the piles of broken drywall Jamal had so arrogantly destroyed. Every single room held a ghost of my past. I remembered the harsh criticisms, the constant comparisons to Brittany, and the suffocating pressure to perfectly conform to my mother's impossible standards. But as I stood there in the absolute darkness, surrounded by the physical ruins of their shattered illusions, I realized something incredibly profound. The house was just wood, plaster, and glass. It held no power over me anymore. The oppressive weight of decades of emotional abuse, the heavy burden of constantly seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of loving me, was finally lifting off my shoulders. It evaporated into the cold winter air, leaving me completely light and free. I had reclaimed a massive piece of real estate tonight. I had permanently reclaimed my own life. The weeks that followed that freezing November night unfolded with a brutal, predictable precision. The spectacular public collapse of my family was not just a one-night event. It was the complete and total demolition of their entire fake reality. I watched from a comfortable distance as the consequences of their arrogance finally caught up to them, tearing apart their lives piece by piece. Let us start with Jamal. The visionary entrepreneur did exactly what cowards always do when their delusions are shattered. He ran. Stripped of his fake real estate empire and publicly exposed as a complete fraud, with a credit score in the 400s, his massive ego could not handle the humiliation. Less than 2 weeks after the eviction, Jamal quietly packed whatever cheap suits he had left and completely abandoned Brittany. He filed for divorce, desperately trying to distance himself from the massive financial mess he had helped create. But leaving his wife did not save him. His leased luxury car was repossessed right out of a motel parking lot just days later. His former business associates, the very men who had laughed at me in the living room, refused to return his calls. He vanished into complete obscurity, a broke, pathetic man with absolutely nothing to show for his years of arrogant boasting. Brittany, the ultimate golden child, suddenly found herself completely alone and utterly unprepared for the real world. Without Jamal to fund her luxury shopping habits, and without my mother to provide a free roof over her head, her life went into a sudden, terrifying freefall. To make matters even worse, Vince the contractor successfully sued her in small claims court for the unpaid labor and materials used during that disastrous kitchen demolition. Because Jamal had skipped town and my mother was legally bankrupt, Brittany was left holding the massive bag. For the first time in her 31 years of life, my entitled sister was forced to get an actual job. The woman who used to loudly brag about flying first class to the Maldives and wearing $15,000 designer silk dresses was now wearing a stiff polyester uniform, working the cash register at a local discount retail store in the local strip mall. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she regularly had to ring up the very same women she used to aggressively show off to at social events. The sheer humiliation of having to force a fake smile bag, cheap clothes, and hand paper receipts to people who used to fiercely envy her was a daily grueling punishment. She spent her days standing on her tired feet for minimum wage, slowly chipping away at a massive legal debt for a kitchen she never even legally owned. And then there was Nancy, my mother, the grand matriarch who had built her entire identity on the fragile illusion of suburban royalty, experienced the most dramatic fall from grace. With the sprawling Elm Street estate officially gone and her credit entirely destroyed by tax defaults and unpaid credit cards, she had absolutely no residential options left. She was forced to move into a cramped, dingy studio apartment on the absolute worst side of the city. The walls were paper thin, the radiator heating barely functioned during the bitter winter, and the only small window looked out over a loud, dirty alleyway filled with overflowing dumpsters. It was a terribly far cry from the manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers, and heated swimming pools she was accustomed to controlling. But the absolute worst part for Nancy was not the grinding poverty, it was the total social isolation. The morning after the disastrous eviction party, news of her fake wealth and public humiliation spread through the Oak Ridge Country Club like a raging wildfire. Patricia Diane and the rest of her wealthy, judgmental friends dropped her instantly, without a single ounce of hesitation. They blocked her phone number and completely pretended she did not exist. When my mother tried to show up at a holiday charity luncheon a month later, desperately hoping to reclaim her lost social standing, she was quietly asked to leave by the stern event coordinator. She had become a total social pariah in the only circle that ever mattered to her. The women she had spent decades trying to impress, the women she had cruelly prioritized over her own children, discarded her the exact second she could no longer afford to keep up appearances. They played a terrible game of deception with my hard-earned financial stability. They pushed me to the absolute edge, absolutely convinced I would silently absorb their endless toxic abuse forever. But the exact moment I finally stopped playing the silent victim, their completely fabricated world shattered into dust. They were permanently left with exactly what they truly deserved. With the toxic elements of my past completely removed from my daily existence, I finally had the mental space and legal authority to deal with the Elm Street property. I had absolutely no desire to ever live in that house again. The walls held too many dark memories, and the ruined kitchen was a permanent reminder of Jamal's arrogant destruction. So the very next morning, I reached out to a prominent commercial real estate developer I had worked with on previous financial consulting projects. He had been looking to acquire large lots in that specific affluent suburban neighborhood to build luxury modern homes. I gave him a quick tour of the property. He did not care about the half-demolished kitchen or the disconnected utilities because he planned to completely level the entire structure anyway. Less than a week later, we closed the deal. He handed me a certified cashier's check for exactly $850,000 in pure cash. Holding that piece of paper in my hands was a surreal experience. It represented so much more than just a massive financial windfall. It was the absolute monetization of my freedom. The very asset my mother had used to manipulate me, the house she had weaponized to elevate my sister and humiliate me, was now the foundation of my children's secure future. I did not waste a single second putting that money to good use. The first thing I did was open 2 high-yield trust accounts for Leo and Mia. I fully funded both of their college tuitions, ensuring they would never have to take out a single student loan or rely on anyone else to secure their education. I broke the generational cycle of financial abuse with a single deposit, but I also knew we desperately needed to celebrate our new beginning. For years, I had watched my mother and sister boast about their lavish vacations, while I stayed home working 80-hour weeks to subsidize their lifestyle. It was finally my turn to enjoy the fruits of my own labor. I booked a 2-week luxury vacation to Italy for me and the kids. We flew first class to Rome, completely bypassing the discount travel options I usually relied on. We spent our days eating authentic gelato near the Colosseum, taking private boat tours along the breathtaking Amalfi Coast and wandering through the historic streets of Florence. Watching Leo and Mia laugh under the warm Tuscan sun, completely free from the heavy, suffocating anxiety that used to plague our family gatherings, was the greatest reward I could have ever asked for. I was finally giving them the peaceful, joyful childhood they entirely deserved. Sitting on a beautiful balcony overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, sipping a glass of rich red wine, I spent a lot of time reflecting on the chaotic events of the past few months. Society constantly tries to push the narrative that family is absolutely everything, that blood ties require endless forgiveness and unconditional loyalty no matter how terribly you are treated. But I learned the hard way that blood does not equal family. Blood simply dictates a biological connection. True family is built entirely on mutual respect, genuine support, and unconditional love. My mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law never offered me any of those things. They only viewed me as a convenient resource to be drained and discarded whenever it suited their selfish needs. Setting ruthless boundaries was not an act of cruelty. It was my ultimate salvation. Walking away from their toxic dynamic and using the legal system to enforce my rights was the most empowering decision I have ever made in my entire life. I refused to let them drag me down with their pathetic sinking ship of massive debt and endless suburban delusion. By firmly standing my ground against their manipulations, I not only completely protected my own hard-earned financial stability, but I also secured a beautiful, thriving future for my children. If you are listening to this and currently struggling with toxic relatives who constantly undermine your success, drain your resources, or make you feel completely worthless, please hear me now. You do not owe your abusers your endless loyalty just because you share the same last name. You have every right to walk away. You have every absolute right to legally protect what is rightfully yours. Have you ever had to use the law to protect yourself from your own family? Let me know in the comments. Please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma. Share this video with someone who might need the courage to finally set their own boundaries. Thank you so very much for listening to my own personal story today.